There are losses that don't just break your heart, they rearrange your whole life. One day you're standing at a graveside trying to breathe through the shock, and the next morning you come home expecting silence only to hear people talking about your life like it's already been divided up. Not your grief, not your memories, the square footage, the keys. The word blood said like it's law. And before we jump in, I want us to walk into this story with something softer than rage. Not to cheer when someone gets humbled, and not to judge anyone as the villain on paper. Just a little quiet. Because sometimes the cruelest thing isn't what people take from you. It's how quickly they decide you no longer count. This is the story of the morning after my wife's funeral, when my in-laws stood in my home and declared it belonged to blood family only. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I listened. And when I finally spoke, it was one sentence they never expected to hear. I'm Thorne Rivington, and I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from? I love seeing how far a story like this can reach, and sometimes just knowing someone is there makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me, because what happened after that funeral wasn't just about property. It was about being erased, being tested, and learning the hard way what family really means. I hadn't slept in my house since the night before the funeral. I couldn't. Her scent was still on the pillow, faint and cruel. So I crashed on the cot in my office at the base, just me, a steel desk, and the dull ache of 100 unspoken things. The morning after we buried Marin, I drove through the sea-soaked streets of Newport with the engine humming like a lullaby, trying to settle a war. I was expecting the kind of quiet that hurts, the echo of an empty home. But when I turned onto Ocean Drive and saw the box truck backed perfectly into my driveway, wheels tucked in like it had practiced the turn, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the truck. It was the way the front curtains were yanked half open, the way the front door was ajar, like someone didn't care who saw them in my house. I circled the block once, slow. I didn't go in guns blazing. My military instinct kicked in. Observe first, move later. I parked down the street and walked back on foot, my boots silent on the wet pavement. When I reached the porch, I pulled my keys. Tried the front door. The key didn't turn. Same damn key I'd used for 5 years. 5 years of Christmases and anniversaries and nights we'd argued and then made up right there in the foyer. Now it was just a dead piece of metal in my hand. I didn't knock. I stepped to the edge of the porch, hugged the wall, and listened. Inside, I heard voices, her family. I don't care what the paperwork says, Alistair Whitlock's voice cut through smooth as courtroom marble. This house and everything tied to it falls under Whitlock property. Blood family only. Grant's voice sharper. The vet clinic's already got a buyer. All we have to do is clear the office and send over the deed. Thorne won't fight it. Cecily added, her voice sugar-wrapped venom. He's still in shock. Plus the military will ship him off in no time. He's transitional. Then Pierce, snorting. We got the locks changed this morning. Clean break. No mess. It was like watching someone plan your execution while standing in your shoes. They weren't just moving on. They were taking everything. The house the clinic Marin built, even the tiny cottage she and I renovated with our own hands down by the water. And worse, they were speaking like she'd never loved me, like I'd never mattered. I didn't breathe. I didn't interrupt. I let them talk, because people who think they've already won always reveal the most. When I finally stepped inside, I didn't slam the door. I didn't even raise my voice. The living room looked like a war zone. Boxes lined the floors labeled in neat handwriting. Cottage linens, clinic docs, storage kitchenware. Cecily was holding our wedding photo, sliding the picture of me out of the frame and tossing it in the trash, while carefully smoothing the one of Marin into a smaller frame. Grant was giving orders to a mover like he owned the place. Pierce sat cross-legged on the floor eating Cheetos and scrolling his phone. I stood there until they noticed me. Until the silence hit like a bomb. Then I said it. From the moment Marin passed, everything here legally transferred to my name. And her attorney is on his way now. Stillness. Absolute stillness. Even the guy wrapping the dining chairs in bubble wrap froze mid-bend. Cecily's mouth opened, then closed. But Alistair, he didn't flinch. That bastard smiled. Marin was a Whitlock, he said, his voice low and arrogant. We have counsel too. And this is Newport Thorne. You're not going to win here. You're an outsider. Grant stepped in smirking. You think Marin would actually leave all this to someone who isn't even blood? I didn't answer. I just looked down at the trash can where my face had been discarded, and then up at the new lock on my own front door. If they were this confident if they changed the locks hours after her funeral, then they must think they had proof. Legal leverage. But if Marin had made plans of her own, the real question wasn't whether I had a place in this house. It was who was holding the stronger hand. No one moved. That one sentence had cracked the room open like a fault line. But instead of erupting, they recalculated. Adjusted. Alistair adjusted his cufflinks and crossed his arms. Now listen. He began, voice-coded in something he thought passed for calm. This is a time for mourning, not legal theatrics. Cecily took over, stepping forward with the softness of a practiced manipulator. Sweetheart, she said, using the same tone she'd used at the wedding rehearsal dinner. We're all grieving. This isn't about sides. It's about what's best for the family. Grant snorted. You're not going to be stationed in Newport forever, man. Let us take care of everything. It'll be easier for you. I didn't argue. I scanned the boxes. There were labels already printed, color-coded. Clinic, cottage, main house to storage. This wasn't grief. This was a strategy. This had been in motion long before the dirt hit her casket. And then I remembered. The first time I had dinner with the Whitlocks, the dining room was so pristine it felt staged. The table settings were aligned like compass points. No laughter, no mess. Just the icy perfection of wealth with a side of subtle interrogation. Cecily had asked about my rank like it was a math problem she already knew the answer to. Alistair had dropped facts about my parents, Midwestern factory town, father died. Young mother remarried, a welder like a dossier report. I wasn't being welcomed, I was being profiled, and at the Newport Yacht Club where the air smelled like privilege and old gin. Alistair handed me a prenup with a monogrammed pen. It's standard, he'd said. You understand military life unpredictable. I love your daughter, I'd replied. Everyone says that, he answered. He'd brought up the clinic then, too. It's a Whitlock asset, he said. I hadn't argued, but I remembered the flicker in Marin's eyes when I told her. Now standing in my hollowing living room, I realized this wasn't new. This had always been the plan. Words kept repeating. Temporary, bloodline, instability. It wasn't an attack. It was a narrative they'd built for years. I wasn't meant to stay. I was meant to pass through. Then came the slip. Pierce, grinning, tossed a screwdriver between his fingers. Changing the locks was Dad's idea. He told us a while ago. Just needed the right timing. Grant added, What you think we came up with this overnight, everything's been scheduled. They didn't notice the way I straightened, the way my eyes narrowed, because now I knew. The night of the charity gala, months before Marin passed, I'd stepped out into the garden to breathe, and I heard them. Alistair, Grant, Pierce on the patio behind the ivy. If she goes first, Alistair said, the locks change within 24 hours. He's a son-in-law, not a heir. The clinic's the big one. We get that, we win. I told Marin that night. She hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed. She'd just held my arm tighter and whispered, If they ever treat you like an outsider, we'll protect this house by law. I thought it was just love talking. Now I realized it had been a promise, a plan. So when I said her lawyer is on the way, I wasn't bluffing. I was triggering something Marin had already set in motion. Then, as Cecily ordered a mover to take down a small handwritten sign that said our favorite corner, M&T, the guy muttered. She said to toss it. Didn't match the decor. I stepped forward, took it from his hands. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A man's voice, low and exact. Mr. Rivington. This is Silas Keene. I'm parked at the end of your street. Don't leave the house. They've just made a critical mistake. I didn't move from the driveway. Not when Alistair raised his voice. Not when Cecily started whispering to Grant like I couldn't hear them. I stood exactly where the moving truck would have to pass to exit. Not in defiance, but in control. They'd mistaken my silence for weakness. I was done giving them that comfort. If they wanted war, they'd have to drive through me to start it. Alistair was the first to snap. "You're trespassing, Thorn. This isn't your house anymore." He had the gall to say that while standing next to a sofa, Marin and I had picked out together a coffee table we argued over for 3 weeks, and a photo of her dog tucked into a moving box like junk mail. Grant stepped forward, arms crossed like a bouncer. "You're a soldier. You know when to walk away from a fight you can't win." His voice dropped to a low, smug tone. "Just go, man. You're embarrassing yourself." And Cecily, ever the manipulator, layered on the performance. She placed a hand to her chest like she was the one being attacked. "Don't do this, Thorn. It's too soon. Let us grieve Marin in peace." I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I did what I'd learned from years of active duty: observe, calculate, wait. I scanned what they were carrying out of the house office folders with the vet hospital's logo, a set of spare keys on Marin's old keychain, a red binder with the letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize. None of that screamed grief. It screamed strategy. A memory clicked in the back of my mind 6 months ago in our kitchen. Marin had pulled a dusty metal case from the cabinet above the fridge. She called it the fallback. "If anything happens to me," she said, "eyes steady, they'll act fast. They'll hit hard when you're not ready." She laid out a diagram: our house, the clinic, the cottage by the bay. Ownership transfers to you automatically. You won't need to fight for it unless they make it a war. At the time, I thought it was paranoia. Now I saw it for what it was: battlefield planning. I remembered her quiet confidence as she explained the mechanism: joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. She didn't need me to understand the law. She just needed me to follow the plan if they struck, and they had. But she hadn't told me everything. Another memory more recent. The vet hospital. Marin had just finished a surgery. Her parents showed up with no warning. They claimed to check on her but didn't ask once how she felt. Alistair inspected the clinic like it was a real estate listing. Grant asked about client growth. Cecily floated a casual, "What if something happened to you?" question with a smile too wide to be maternal. Marin hadn't blinked. She just looked at me and said, "We've planned for everything." But I hadn't realized then how much planning she had done without me. Back in the present, a low rumble echoed down the street. A dark SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of the driveway. Silas Keene. I didn't need to see him to know. Marin's lawyer. The man I'd never met but whose name I'd heard once late at night when she thought I was asleep. He was the one she updated every year, the one who kept the real line of defense. I stayed planted where I was. The breeze coming off the water whipped through my jacket, but I was burning underneath. The Whitlocks noticed the SUV too. Pierce tried to play it cool, but I saw his jaw tighten. Cecily gripped Grant's wrist. Alistair's mouth drew into a thin, calculated line. Silas stepped out of the car slowly, like he had all the time in the world. He adjusted his coat and spoke before anyone could beat him to it. "Mr. Whitlock," he said, cool and measured, "thank you for triggering the clause Marin set in place. I'll need you all to return the items you've taken. Immediately. We're doing this inside." Silas didn't need an invitation. He walked past me, past Alistair, through the front door like he owned the place. And in a way, legally speaking, he did by proxy. I followed. Not because I didn't know where this was going, but because I knew exactly where it had to go. Inside, the living room looked like a war zone mid-evacuation. Half-packed boxes, open drawers, framed photos on the floor. A vase from Marin's grandmother lay tipped in the corner, water still seeping into the rug. Silas paused only long enough to glance at the chaos before turning to the Whitlocks. "Let's move this to the dining room." He made it sound like a negotiation. It wasn't. We all ended up around the heavy oak table Marin and I had hosted holidays on. Now it looked like a courtroom. Silas laid down a slim black folder first, then a thicker one, then a third. "I am the legal representative of the late Marin Whitlock Rivington, and as of her passing, the assigned representative of Thorn Rivington under her estate." He turned to me. That designation was updated 3 months before her death. Alistair scoffed. "What estate? She was our daughter." Silas ignored the protest. Let's start with facts. The House Veterinary Clinic and Bay Cottage were restructured under joint survivorship. Upon her death, full ownership passed to Mr. Rivington. These documents were filed and recorded. He flipped to a stamped page. In this county 4 years ago. Recorded by your daughter, notarized independently. Grant leaned forward, voice tight. That can't be. Silas raised an eyebrow. It can, and it is. Cecily tried a new tactic, tears. How can you do this, Thornwright, after we buried her? She wouldn't want us fighting like this. I looked at her but didn't respond. I thought of the nights Maren came home from those family dinners, head low, voice quiet. I stayed quiet for her then, but not anymore. Silas didn't flinch. You initiated this by changing the locks, by hiring a moving company, by removing items from the property. He turned to the movers, still standing awkwardly near the door. Gentlemen, I suggest you stop unless you'd like your company implicated in a civil suit. They hesitated, then began slowly putting down boxes. Silas continued. I need to see the receipt for the new locks and the moving company's contract. Grant didn't answer. Silas reached for a paper from the table, a folded invoice sticking out from a folder. He scanned it. Ordered 2 days ago, installed this morning. He tapped the paper. This proves intent, not impulse. That was the moment it shifted. Even Alistair looked less sure. You're playing a game you already lost, Silas said. And you've activated protections you can't undo. There's a clause in Maren's file if you act in bad faith or attempt to remove Mr. Rivington from shared property. You forfeit any personal effects or inheritance she left in trust for you. Pierce stood up indignant. That's a bluff. Silas tilted his head. Feel free to test it. Then, with unsettling calm, he placed a thicker file onto the table. This is phase 2, and before you consider suing, I want you to learn a phrase that will follow you through every courtroom from here to Providence no contest clause. I saw Grant shift uncomfortably. Cecily blinked rapidly. Alistair didn't speak for the first time since I arrived. And I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning they never thought would come. One Maren prepared for without fanfare or threat. One I would finish for her. The air around the table was thick, like the ocean had pulled itself in through the cracks of the old house and was sitting there waiting. No one moved. Not when Silas placed the second folder in front of us, not when he slid it open with the precision of a surgeon peeling back skin. Alistair broke the silence, first voice clipped. I don't think you understand how Newport works, son. He emphasized that last word with the same disdain he always carried, like he never fully accepted me as anything more than a passing inconvenience in Maren's life. We have relationships in this town, he continued. We don't need to fight in court. We just let people know what kind of man you are and the doors close on their own. Cecily leaned in like a co-conspirator in a bad play. Clients will stop showing up at the clinic once your name is on the door. No one wants to leave their pets with a man who attacked his grieving in-laws. She glanced down at a photo of Maren tucked between stacks of legal papers. Don't shame her memory with this. Grant, ever the pragmatic vulture, dropped his voice into a mock-considerate tone. The Whitlock name is on everything on the hospital's license, the branding, the reputation. You really think you can run that place without us? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Silas had the floor now. He opened the second folder and took out a thick sheaf of papers, stamped with 2 seals, one from the state, one from a notary public. This, he said, is what we call an iron will. Fully notarized, independently witnessed, and updated 18 months before Mrs. Rivington's passing. Nothing in it is ambiguous. Nothing is left to interpretation. He passed copies to the 4 Whitlocks, seated across from us. All tangible and intangible assets, including property, business holdings, and digital rights, pass solely and exclusively to her legal spouse, Thorne Rivington. There was no space for emotion in his voice, just cold, practiced finality. Then Silas dropped the hammer. The will includes a no-contest clause. He gave them a moment to process that. Anyone who challenges the terms of this document will be legally disinherited in full. That includes not just monetary inheritance, but personal items, artifacts, letters, photos, and access to family property. You don't just lose the money, you're erased from the file. Pierce's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Alistair looked like he was doing math in his head. Cecily's mascara trembled. Grant. He laughed low bitter. But Silas wasn't finished. He turned a page and tapped 3 handwritten notes. Mrs. Rivington anticipated your reactions. He read aloud. If my mother cries and begs for reconciliation, remind Thorne that guilt is not love. If my father talks about bloodlines, remind him ownership does not come from biology, it comes from law. If Grant brings up the clinic, present the purchase agreement addendum. I saw the blood drain from Grant's face. That last line hit home. Purchase agreement, I asked. Silas nodded and took out another document. Mrs. Rivington drafted a protective agreement for the clinic. In the event of her death, any outside offers to purchase the business must be disclosed. Which brings us to this. He unfolded a printed email, Nora's name at the top. She received a message last week from Dr. Hargrove, your late wife's colleague. He was approached by a representative of the Whitlock family offering to buy or co-manage the clinic. Nora had forwarded it to Silas with a note. Did Myron know about this? Grant started to deny it, but Silas wasn't done. We also have a string of texts between Dr. Hargrove and a number matching your personal cell, Mr. Whitlock. Grant's lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't concern. It was premeditation. You were circling like a shark while your sister was still alive. Cecily flinched eyes, darting toward the folder again. There's a section for us, isn't there? She left something. Silas tapped a clause near the bottom of the will. Mrs. Rivington designated a small set of heirlooms and letters for the Whitlock family conditional on respectful conduct toward her spouse and property. His voice dropped an octave. That condition was breached this morning. That was it. That was the moment the desperation started leaking through the Whitlock's polished armor. Not because they cared about the heirlooms, but because they couldn't spin the narrative anymore. They couldn't claim to be the grieving family protecting Marin's legacy. They were exposed. Opportunists. Every move recorded. I looked up. My voice didn't shake. You will return every item you removed. You will stay away from the clinic. You will not contact our staff, our clients, or our vendors. You will not set foot on any of these properties again. Alistair narrowed his eyes. And if we don't, Silas didn't hesitate. Then I file an emergency injunction. I call Chief Kelleher and present the trespassing evidence. And I bring these documents into open court. Alistair had been quiet too long. Then his voice sliced through the room like broken glass. If we can't take back our property through probate law, we'll prove you're not fit to keep it. I didn't respond, but I felt the pulse behind my eyes tighten. Then Pierce, young stupid, always a half-second late, chimed in with a shrug. How do we even know those transfers were legal? Maybe she wasn't in the right mind when she signed. You sure Marin wasn't on medication at the time? The room fell dead silent. That's when I realized it wasn't about money anymore. They were going to attack her memory. Silas closed the folder like he was putting a body back in the ground. So that's your next move, he said flatly. Challenge her mental capacity. Claim she wasn't competent when she made her choices. Grant leaned forward. She was sick. No one's denying that. She was on heavy medication near the end. Who's to say she understood the full implications of what she signed? She saw a lawyer, I said. My voice was low, measured. Twice a year. For 5 years. I was gripping the edge of the table hard enough that my nails dug into the wood. Alistair tried a softer tone. We're not attacking her. We're protecting her legacy. There's a difference. Bullshit, I muttered. But Silas cut in before I could escalate. I anticipated this argument. He pulled out another file and opened it slowly, like revealing a secret. This is a signed letter from Dr. Valencia Marin's primary physician. It states clearly that she retained full cognitive function at the time of her legal updates. He flipped through clinical assessments, date-stamped visits, medical charts, and notes. Her lawyer conducted capacity assessments during each legal meeting. Witnesses were required for every signature. This was not last minute. It was years in the making. Cecily's hand flew to her mouth. Pierce stared down at the table like it had betrayed him. But Grant didn't give up. You expect anyone to believe she did all this quietly without telling her own family. She didn't trust you, I said, and now I understand why. Silas slid out another packet: emails, invoices, screenshots. This is your family's record of interactions with 2 different locksmith companies and 3 moving services, one of which was scheduled the day after Marin's death. That is premeditated action, not grief. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, my phone buzzed. Nora, I answered. Her voice was tight. Thorne, we just got a call from someone claiming to represent the Whitlocks. They asked for vendor account access and tried to change the pharmacy delivery address. They want control of inventory and billing. I closed my eyes and pressed my fingers to the bridge of my nose. Silas overheard. You're being attacked on 2 fronts. One physical, one operational. I whispered, I can't leave the house. No, he said. You leave, and they'll spin the narrative. Say you abandoned it. Claim adverse possession. You stay until we get them out legally and permanently. A knock at the back door startled us all. Rosa. She came in slowly, wringing her hands. I shouldn't be here, but I had to say something. She pulled out a crumpled slip of paper. Mrs. Cecily told me last week. The morning after the funeral, we move in. Take everything. I wrote it down. She thought I was deaf. Silas smiled for the first time. It wasn't a nice smile. Would you be willing to provide that to the court as a sworn affidavit? Rosa nodded. She can't treat people like furniture anymore. I sat back, cold, silent, watching them squirm. Silas, I said quietly, record everything they did this morning. Lock it in. File it. He looked at me, assessing. You want them to stop, or you want them never to try again? I didn't blink. End it. He nodded and pulled a sealed envelope from the bottom of his briefcase. On the front, Marin's handwriting, read only if they try to bury him. Silas placed it on the table. This is the final safeguard. Marin's last weapon. If I open this, we go public, with everything. Alistair stood suddenly, chest heaving. You think you'll win. You think Newport will turn on us. We are this town. Cecily whispered Marin's name like it was a shield. Grant took a step back, face pale. Pierce said nothing. Silas turned to me. One word from you, and we read it. From that moment on, their reputations, their legacy, and their standing in this town will be gone. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass. I stared at the envelope. I didn't hear the wind. I didn't hear the waves. I heard only my wife's voice in my head. And I asked myself, was I ready to let her say goodbye the only way they would understand? I didn't need a speech. I didn't need a plan. Just a nod. Silas looked at me one last time. His fingers hovered over the sealed folder marked in Marin's handwriting, and I gave the smallest nod of my life, the kind of nod that feels like you've just flipped the world on its axis. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about ending this war before it could begin again. Silas turned to the table. All conditions are met, he said calmly. We proceed. Alistair leaned back, arms crossed like a general. Cecily's fingers curled tightly around her teacup, lipsticked and trembling. Grant was already halfway to cracking, checking his phone like there might be an exit strategy on the screen. Pierce stayed quiet, he always did when it mattered. Then Alistair made his move. He yanked out his phone, dialed with aggressive confidence, and barked into the receiver. Yes, I need officers dispatched. Immediate trespassing and obstruction. My daughter's house is being taken over by a non-family party. Silas didn't even blink. Thank you, he said loudly enough for the room. I too will appreciate a police presence to officially document the scene. 20 minutes later, Chief Owen Kelleher walked through my front door, flanked by 2 deputies. The moment he saw me and Silas, he nodded. Mr. Whitlock, he said. This your house now? Silas stepped forward. We have the deed, the will, and proof of attempted removal of property without consent. Chief Kelleher turned to Alistair. Then I'm gonna need everyone not named Silas, or... He looked at me. You, sir, to stop touching anything and stand back. It was the first time I saw Alistair falter, not in rage, but in calculation. His power didn't hold here. Not anymore. Silas placed the envelope on the table like it weighed 100 pounds. Per the decedent's written instructions, this document is to be opened and read aloud only if her husband is subject to coercion, intimidation, or attempts to discredit the legitimacy of her final wishes. He broke the seal. Every eye followed the sound of the clasp opening like it was thunder. I didn't watch them. I looked at the walls, the door frame where Marin used to lean while sipping wine, the couch we'd fought, and made up on the antique chest she'd filled with our first Christmas memories. She was here, in the silence, in every square inch of this house. Then Silas began to read. Her voice through his cut through every lie they'd ever built. If you are reading this, it means you tried to do exactly what I feared. You tried to strip the man I chose of what I entrusted him with, not just property, but love, memory, and legacy. I watched Cecily close her eyes. To preempt any claim that I was too sick, too manipulated, or too weak to make these decisions, please refer to the attached timeline of meetings, emails, and notarized affirmations, many of which occurred long before my diagnosis. She'd outmaneuvered them before they even realized they were at war. Silas flipped to the next page. To my father, Alistair, you insisted on a prenup before my wedding. You told me no daughter of yours would marry without protecting the bloodline. But you forgot I married to protect my heart. Alistair's mouth opened, then closed. To my mother, Cecily, you erased my husband from family photos, returned gifts he gave me unopened, and told me he would never belong. But he did. Because I chose him. And you can't erase that with Photoshop or pearls. Cecily crumbled into her chair. To Grant, I know about your calls to Dr. Hargrove. I know you tried to buy my clinic before I was even cold. You didn't want to honor my work, you wanted to wear it like a badge. Grant stood up. I sit down, Chief Kelleher said. He did. And Pierce Silas read. You were proud to say you had the locksmith on speed dial. You joked about changing the locks before the memorial ended. I heard you. I remember. Silence. The kind that swallows men whole. Then Marin's letter shifted. To my husband. You were not my plan. You were my proof. Proof that love doesn't have to ask permission from bloodlines or bank accounts. Proof that family is built in moments of choosing again and again, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. I didn't cry. Not then. Not when her voice was a sword and a shield in my hands. Grant stood up again. Look, we've made mistakes, but this doesn't have to end in scorched earth. We can make this work. I'm willing to talk compensation, split the house, walk away with clean hands. Silas stepped in front of me. Any negotiation now is an admission of intent, and you've just admitted to it on record. I don't want your money, I said. I want you to carry back every single item you tried to take, with your own hands. Silas nodded. That's the condition. The police officers watched in silence as Alistair, Grant, and Pierce moved like ghosts, returning paintings, setting vases back in place, smoothing blankets. At one point, I asked Pierce to return a ceramic seal Marin once called her guardian of the lighthouse. He held it like it burned. When they were done, Nora called. It's everywhere, she said. Online, at the clinic, even the club. People are talking. I looked out the window. Alistair stood by the moving truck staring at nothing. His kingdom had no crown, only broken pieces. Cecily turned at the doorway. This isn't over. Silas adjusted his cuffs. You're right, it isn't. But next chapter won't be written by you. As the door shut, I realized something terrifying and liberating today wasn't the end. It was only the first reckoning. When you destroy a family's false crown, the world doesn't applaud. It stares. Then it whispers. That week, the whispers roared. Silas kept me updated. Cecily had been asked politely but firmly to step down from 2 charity boards. Alistair's name no longer showed up on yacht club emails. Grant, I heard, tried to pitch a new business idea at the chamber mixer and got met with a silence thick enough to drown in. But me, I went to work. Nora had secured every vendor account. She changed passwords, blocked unknown IPs, and flagged suspicious attempts to reroute payments. Dr. Hargrove sent me a single text, "Not doing business with cowards. I stand with you." I walked into the clinic the next morning and stayed. I answered phones, I cleaned cages. I helped a golden retriever named Tilly through a seizure and carried a parrot back to its owner after surgery. I stopped being the man in the shadows of a will. I became the man on the front lines of something worth saving. Then came the letter. From Alistair, Thickstock, wax seal. Inside was a single-page apology that never quite said sorry. Instead, we misjudged the moment. We acted out of grief. Family matters are messy. It ended with a cashier's check large enough to buy back their image. I burned it, not the money. The gesture. Then I mailed the check back with a single note: family is earned, not purchased. Silas helped me finalize the paperwork to legally bar further contact. I changed the locks not out of fear, but finality. Then came the rebuild. I renamed the clinic the Marin Whitlock Memorial Animal Hospital. We installed a bench outside with her name, and on that bench sat a little bronze plaque that read, "For those who stayed." I established a fund, small but growing, for veterans who needed care for their service animals. Marin had always said healing animals meant healing people. I wanted that truth to echo. One afternoon, Nora handed me a file. Inside was a handwritten letter from Marin found taped inside an old adoption form binder. When the door finally closed and the house went quiet again, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like air returning to my lungs. Grief doesn't leave just because you won something on paper. It lingers in the small places: an empty mug, a coat still on the hook, the way your body reaches for a voice that isn't there anymore. But that morning taught me something we don't talk about enough. Sometimes the hardest part of loss isn't the funeral. It's what comes after, when people decide your pain has an expiration date. If there's a thread that runs through this story, it's this: family isn't a word you inherit. It's a set of choices we make. Who we protect, who we stand beside, who we refuse to erase. And maybe that's where our humanity shows up most clearly. Not in the big speeches, but in the quiet moments when we draw a line and still keep our heart open. If you'd like to be part of this little corner where we listen without rushing to judge, I'd be honored if you subscribed. Think of it less like following a channel and more like joining a room where stories can breathe. And if you want to leave a few lines in the comments, where you're listening from, or the name of someone who stood with you when life got heavy. I read more than you'd think. Thank you for sitting with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.